Hey everybody, TacticAngel back on the PlayStation 5 to take a look at another premium ship in World Warships Legends. This time we'll be looking at Tier 7 Premium Battleship Flandre. For this review, I'll start with some history, move into analysis, discuss commanders, run down the stats with you, and then we'll finish off with some gameplay. If you do want to skip around it all though, you should see some time codes down in the description. As for what the Flandre represents, the single-sentence explanation is that she is intended to be an approximation of the Alsace-class battleships that were to follow the completion of the 3.5 ships of the Richelieu class of battleships. I say 3.5 because the Richelieu class was intended to comprise of the Richelieu, the Jean Bart, Clemenceau, and Gascogne. For those of you familiar with the Gascogne in-game, that is a fair approximation of what the actual plans for the Gascogne were, and I probably don't need to explain why a half-sister is a decent approximation for that ship. In total, the French had between 2 and 3 docks that could be used for building battleships during the years leading up to World War II. In practical terms, they had 2, since the third was taken up by the building of what might have one day become the French aircraft carrier Joffre. In total, the French would build almost 1 3/4 of the Richelieu class of battleships before the Battle of France, which put Gascogne and Clemenceau plans into the waste bin, and likewise everything that would have followed them. In any case, while laying down the Richelieu class ships prior to the fall of France, the French Navy continued to consider what they would build after the Richelieus. These ships are tentatively known as the Alsace class of battleships, after what was intended to be the lead ship of that class. There were several versions of this ship drawn up during the design of the Alsace class, with the versions you see in game being something derived from the C series of designs. The different designs varied in terms of weight, armament, and protection. The reason why this is probably the most reasonable version of the Alsace class has a lot to do with the apparent weight, protection, speed, and armament depicted. Like I mentioned in my Champagne review, the French had flirted with the possibility of designing a 16-inch naval gun, and the use of that gun would have been considered here. That gun was being developed in collaboration with the Soviet Union, and realistically barely got off the ground for political reasons. Starting over and doing it on their own would probably have taken a bit longer, and even then, the chances of using a 16-inch gun were somewhat reduced by weight considerations and logistical concerns, since the French already had 3 different battleship calibers of gun, and therefore ammunition, in service at the time. The other reason why the Flandre design, as represented here, is quite reasonable is that this design would not have required extensive hypothetical improvements to existing French shipbuilding facilities. Again, it would have been built more or less in the same facilities then in existence, and the design was not so large that it would further limit the number of French ports from which she could operate. The Richelieus had barely more than a handful around France, with a few more ports out of North Africa where she could operate. Where this design goes a little wonky is that the year of design is listed as 1952. That's a bit strange since the Alsace-class battleship project was started in 1938. I can only guess this is based on the projected year of completion if the French had started making battleships after World War II, and to justify the helicopter pad on its aft deck. In any case, the H is painted atop what is clearly hangar doors, which would have housed the original aviation facility for catapult aircraft in the original design. Other than that, I don't have access to detailed enough information on how this varies from the C-series designs. I suspect this assumes some things about AA and secondary battery refits though, which isn't really all that big of a deal. I will state for the record though that Flandre was expected to be one of the ships of the Alsace series had it ever been built. The Flandre in-game is not that hard to sum up in a few sentences, or perhaps even in a single question. What if you took a French battleship and made it more like every other battleship, just perhaps with some of the things that you'd expect from a French battleship in World Warships Legends? Well, that's Flandre. The advantages she has over a lot of ships that share this sort of traditional turret arrangement is that she has the classic sort of layered shell protection against armored piercing shells. When well angled, she's protected from almost all AP. When poorly angled, she'll save you from a lot of citadel damage that you probably deserve. Perhaps unexpectedly, she comes with an enormous number of hit points. If you live long enough and use all your heals, you can top off at over 100,000 hit points on a tier 7 battleship. If you build into it, that number can get even quite a bit higher. She's also French, so she's both fast and has access to a speed boost, which makes her that much faster, giving her fantastic ability to get around the battlefield, whether that is running away at incredible speed or actually sailing towards the enemy. The downside to Flandre is pretty normal, and then some. Like other French battleships, for as good as she is against AP shells, her armor is pretty much 32mm everywhere except for her belt, turrets, and conning tower. In addition to the normal delights that come with being set on fire, cruisers and some battleships that are well suited to shoot HE will enjoy farming just tons of direct damage, in addition to all the burning. The high hit point pool makes Flandre really an ideal target for farming impressive, if meaningless damage. Therefore, if you are one of those types of ships, you will have every reason to shoot this ship, which can make it kind of a drag to play. The Flandre also comes with some pretty unreliable guns. Gifted with French dispersion, which is basically the same as German dispersion, firing at range can often be a frustrating affair. If you do manage to hit, you also don't have incredible penetration. To make matters worse, you have the second worst reload of any battleship with 15-inch guns, just behind the Vittorio Veneto, which is almost universally considered something of a floating disaster. Thanks to the unique abilities of French commanders, you can make some pretty noticeable improvements in 2 or 3 ways with this ship, but you're never gonna quite fix all of your problems. All in all, I'll point back to my first impression about this ship, which is people who will enjoy this ship are folks who like fairly ordinary battleships, but want a bit of that French speed and AP protection ordinarily offered by French battleships. For commanders, you're best off sticking with a battleship commander. A large part of that is because you will have access to Megalomania in that case. Due to the extremely high hit point pool of the Flandre and your really slow reload, this is actually a pretty good choice. You'll still start out with well more hit points than most battleships at the tier, and your reload will start just under 30 seconds, which isn't exactly good, but is considerably more usable. If you care to combine this with Jujard, you can improve the range and penetration of the ship by a fair degree. And really there, the range is more of a guarantee, while the penetration is kind of questionable. Improving your overall gun performance, both in damage and accuracy, is nice, but even with your base trait, the penetration fall off on this ship seems to be more than Jujard's base trait can really fix. And scoring citadels against even easy to exploit broadside battleships like Sinop, Vladivostok, or Yamato seem inconsistent at best. The downside you face with Jujard is largely limited to the fact that you'll be kneecapping one of the fastest battleships in the game to much more pedestrian speeds. You might say it's worth the trade-off, but the very modest improvements you get with your guns makes this a very debatable trade. If you choose to go with Guprat instead, then you're going to experience the sort of appreciation a blind man has with a shotgun when enjoying a day at the range. It's actually not going to be quite that bad, but these guns can be awfully trolly at times and result in a lot of misses. But if you do hit anything, you should feel pretty good about yourself. Here, Megalomania is almost a required skill since quantity is going to make up for the quality of your marksmanship. And with enough volume of fire, this sort of build can be pretty effective. The drop off in HP is more than made up by having 1 or 2 extra heals, improved heals at that, if you choose Master Mechanic, and the real downside to this build is whether or not Fate, Luck, God, or just plain RNG shines some level of favor on you. If you do get stuck using Louis de Funès, the French base commander, there's really not much that he offers this boat beyond not having to fiddle with your other commanders if they're being used on another ship, and the ability to get better stealth in slot 2. That may actually allow you to do that 3/4 turn that you need to make at the beginning of a lot of games. After that, you can get a modest speed boost, which is almost nice, but since this is a French battleship, you can achieve better results there elsewhere. Overall, it's safe to say he's generally not the greatest pick here. As we jump into stats, everything you're going to see on the screen is going to be the base stats before any commander is applied. but the concealment does include the camo that comes with the ship. Starting with survivability, this is actually the strongest thing the ship has going for it. With 75,400 hit points, you have easily the most hit points of any battleship at the tier as of her release. You also have enough hit points to take Megalomania and still have more hit points than everything other than a Vanguard or a Vladivostok. Her armor profile is typically French, sporting the sort of 32mm everywhere armor common to French battleships. She comes with layered armor and a turtleback. This tends to work pretty well against almost all battleship AP if you are appropriately angled, and it makes the Flandre typically difficult to citadel at any range. Similar to other French ships though, anything with equilibrium of power, any German cruiser, and any HE shot from 8-inch guns or higher will chew through this armor scheme with consistent damage in addition to normal annoyances caused by fire. Your citadel is not quite below the waterline, but thanks to the layered armor protection, decent armor belt, and turtleback, I haven't found myself getting citadeled in this ship almost regardless of how irresponsibly I play it. She also has good protection from torpedoes, taking nearly 1/3 of the damage off the top. Being careful with your hit points through wise positioning and angling can make the Flandre a very difficult ship for almost any other battleship to eliminate, and building towards defense is not a bad idea. But you better take some enjoyment out of that because Flandre's offensive capability in return are a bit limited. Sporting a 3x3 arrangement of 380mm guns, you have a much more traditional layout than the Richelieu class, with 2 turrets forward and 1 at the rear. With 17.5 kilometer range, you have a bit more options to do that because that's a pretty good range. This 33-second reload is one of the longest reloads for a Tier 7 battleship, and one reason why you'll want to be very judicious with your shots and try to shoot targets of opportunity which are poorly angled against you. This is also because these are 15-inch guns, so you won't overmatch almost any of the cruisers that you face, and the same can be said for Tier 7 and above battleships. You have typical French dispersion, which is to say not particularly accurate guns, and at least it feels like you have relatively poor penetration at range. 36-second turret traverse is neither fast nor slow really, and the fire chance, HE damage, and AP damage are pretty much right in the middle of where you'd expect them to be for a 15-inch battleship. Thanks to your lengthy reload though, this does mean that you're about 20% below average for your damage per minute. Combine that with your good survivability and you would be right to assume that being successful in Flandre is often an exercise in outlasting your opponents. One other note here on artillery though, you have a pretty impressive number of secondaries. On paper, this actually gives you one of the highest secondary damage per minute and highest potential fire chance if you can get into range. In practice, the damage per minute isn't quite that high because the dual 100mm can't damage a lot of targets, but the fires do still stick. Since Flandre only has the standard unimpressive 5 km secondary of most ships, I probably wouldn't build into this, but it is actually 500 meters better than most French ships, and in this case they're actually very efficiently placed around the ship as opposed to all on the back like most French ships, so that's worth mentioning. Jumping next to AA, the Flandre's 94 rating is good. It earns this by having 232 damage per second at 5 kilometers, and carriers that fly into your AA range will pretty immediately recognize that they've done so, particularly if you do anything to enhance that damage. For better or worse, you only pick up about another 100 DPS as planes get closer to you, giving you a slightly below average damage per second overall, but that long range AA does provide a meaningful deterrent and can help you shield other ships nearby. Overall, carriers will probably prefer to strike you rather than an American battleship or a few other of the really well defended battleships like Lion or Jean Bart, but other than that, you ought to be relatively low on their priority list. Maneuverability is another good stat for Flandre, due almost entirely to its speed. Clocking in at 33.5 knots, you are 1/2 knot slower than the Champagne, but otherwise likely the fastest battleship in every game you play. This 910 meter turning circle is 70 meters worse than average, which isn't great, but it's not surprising on such a big ship that you can see it noticeably drifting in a turn. Likewise, the 16.6 on the rudder is close enough to average not to complain about. This stat plus your engine boost, survivability, and lackluster gun performance should encourage you to play a flanker when you can. Creating crossfires with your superior ability to relocate will be key to having good games in this ship most of the time. Concealment on a battleship is rarely a make or break stat, so with that out of the way, let's get into the bad news. Sadly, you're likely to be spotted shortly after the game begins due to your higher than average visibility even for a battleship, and that hurts the Flandre in Legends because you do want to take up those outside positions, which often require you to turn. She's also 100 meters more noticeable from the air, which isn't a huge deal, and has minor advantages when firing from smoke due to the relatively small caliber of her guns. Next comes consumables. You have a standard damage control party. You also come with 3 heals, which isn't all that remarkable, except that the Flandre on PC has 1 heal less than normal. That said, 0.5% for 28 seconds is going to get you about 10,500 hit points normally, and right about an even 10k with Megalomania. Since you won't have any aircraft hidden beneath your helipad, you're stuck with secondary targeting in your next slot. No tricks here. If a DD pops out near you, you may as well hit the button. Your third slot, you have an engine boost, which will allow you to comically outrun most cruisers and several destroyers for 3 minutes at a time, or simply relocate with a swiftness. Alright, now that we've got all that out of the way, time to jump into some gameplay. We're going to be on Hotspot. As the game gets going, we're going to go ahead and put our commander up on the screen immediately. I will say, you can see a couple of things here. I have Megalomania active. I also have accuracy in my first slot, equipment consumable, and I've chosen Cunningham as an inspiration to hopefully get the guns under control a little bit. If you do try to play this without anything to control your main battery, because I have tested a full secondary battery, you will hit nothing. You won't even hit the ocean. You won't hit islands. You will hit nothing. You'll probably hit some of those because of gravity. Anyway, so as we start out the game, we're going to go ahead and start rolling out to the left. We're going to try to immediately take up a strong position looking in on B. You can see we've got a speed flag on this. We're going to hit over 36 knots in a battleship without doing anything particularly special. And that's pretty good. Now that look over my shoulder, there is a little bit of skepticism about why an Amagi is following me. Because honestly, a crossfire doesn't work if everybody follows me. So that's not great. I'm going to go ahead and start turning in here because I'm hoping to present a slightly better angle for when the ships start to appear. The Richelieu is not the first ship I was expecting to see. I expected to first see a cruiser. And you can see we're individually firing our guns here because we are trying to make life as difficult as possible for the enemy team. Now, as we're doing this, we're keeping going as fast as we possibly can. This is not a great situation for me to be in because I've got nobody occupying the enemy from the front. And at the moment, these guys have nothing else to shoot at. So you can see they're chewing through my 71,000 hit points pretty quickly. This is not great. We're on fire a couple times. We're already through one of our heals, and it's not feeling great. Pushing in this ship, honestly, not a strong suit. Now that we've kind of got ourselves set up beyond that crossfire, we're in a pretty good position to at least start dishing out some damage. You can see we're putting 15-inch shells in the side of the Richelieu. It works if you're at a range where you can actually hit something. And at this range, you can pretty much do whatever you want with guns this large. You can even miss. So Odin comes around the corner. We're trying to put some shells into that target. We're getting a lot of... not much, really. And as we're doing that, you can see we're kind of aiming upper belt or superstructure. This is mostly because there's really no point shooting at the Odin Citadel at this range, because the thing is really, really well protected. We're just trying to get full pens on this particular target. Now he is running down our Indianapolis. That's not super great. We've already lost our Amagi. That is also not super great. But I don't know what to tell you. The Amagi wasn't the greatest ship to bring all the way over here. And if you do see a CC and they're running around like a crazy person, the best thing to do isn't always to follow them. In any case, we're putting more shells out there on the Odin. We're getting a decent amount of damage. You can see we've already done 76,000 damage, so even a full strength Flandre, we've already put out enough damage to have sunk one of those, minus heals. Looks like that Richelieu is going down. And this Odin is in a pretty bad place. That last set of shells, not super exciting. And as you can see, our team is just collapsing, which isn't great. As the Odin gets further and further away, our shells are getting less and less impressive in terms of accuracy, and really we're probably just going to leave one more set of shells out there before we decide maybe there's something better to do with my life. You can see, of course, there are a couple of ships still in B, and there's also a battleship that's driving straight towards me. I'm at a pretty good angle that I'm not even all that concerned about what it is. Turns out that it's a Colorado. Now, he hasn't taken a whole lot of notice of me. He is... I mean, if he's not at full, he's close enough. I'm not in a great position in terms of hit points overall, but I do have better armor than he does. So we start sailing straight out towards him. We're kind of looking off to our starboard here, just to see if there's anybody who's going to come around that we need to deal with as well. There is the issue of that cruiser that was in B. It doesn't look like the cruiser is close enough to me to be seen, or at least if he is, he's hiding. We're certainly being shot by something with cruiser-like guns. To a certain extent, he might be effectively distracting me here, but I was really kind of hoping to do a drive-by on the Colorado, and it doesn't look like he's cooperating all that much. Now, as we turn out here, this isn't ideal, but Flandre does have really good firing angles when shooting towards the back of your ship. You can basically maintain a bounce chance, and you're really, really close to an auto bounce for most ships that don't have preferential penetration. And there, you can kind of see how tough the Flandre is at pretty close ranges, because we just took those hits without really suffering too terribly badly. I'm going to guess several of those hit and bounced off of my armor belt. We're going to continue to turn out here because We're just trying to maneuver around this Colorado. If we can get him to shoot at us just like that, it feels pretty good in terms of like not taking just a ton of damage. I'm sure a couple of those shells bounced. Now as we're turning ourselves against lower tier battleships, you can usually shoot straight through the front of them. Against equal tier battleships or legendary battleships, you're not going to be able to exploit the bow. Unfortunately, we're kind of running out of hit points here, just like our team is running out of ships. That's unfortunate, because we kind of leave him on almost no hit points whatsoever. Our excellent maneuverability in terms of overall speed continues to pay off for us. Not sure at all what just happened with the Colorado shot there, but we'll just be happy and finish him off. The Cleveland, for better or worse, seems to be shooting AP at us. If he's shooting AP at us, we've got a lot of stuff up there that can bounce him. Pretty much everything other than the superstructure. And he would probably be well advised to be shooting HE at me at this point. Because at least if he hit my superstructure, he would have a chance of doing some damage. And if he hit me anywhere else, he could still set me on fire. I'm turning out here because I think he's going to hit the island, which I was correct about. We try to sneak in enough damage there to finish him off. We don't. We get a lot of over-penetrations, which is really frustrating in a ship that honestly is somewhat underwhelming in terms of its penetration characteristics. Now we're pretty sure he's going to pop out on the other side, so you can see we're using our good maneuverability to go ahead and meet him there. We really don't have a whole lot to lose. Our team is down to just us and one other ship. That would have been a really nice time to finish him off, but still with the AP, we're getting a little bit lucky here in terms of, I guess this guy's shell selection button may not be working. Maybe he's practicing aim or something. In any case, there's a flat part on the back of that ship. We put her right in the aft of the Cleveland. Finish him off. 2 versus 2. We're down on points. We need to keep pushing here. Because, of course, there's really nobody left to do the work. Now, in spite of the fact that our teammate has died, we do congratulate him because he appears to have had a pretty darn good game. Walked away with Kraken for it. We're going to go ahead and continue to cap this base and then try to run back to A. See if we can't spot that cruiser. Last I saw, he was nearly at full life. So really, this is a matchup that shouldn't work all that well for Flandre, because a heavy cruiser will punch right through almost all of this ship. I say that because it's a Japanese cruiser and it's probably just going to shoot HE at me. Now, that said, I did choose to show this because as the text of the review may indicate, I don't really love this ship all that much. So I'm trying to give it the best presentation possible, and I accidentally deleted the review I wanted to use. So that was unfortunate. And as we come around the side of this island, you can see we aren't immediately spotted and we don't see anybody. And we'll go ahead and speed this up towards the end. We're going to lose this game. This particular cruiser is demonstrating how to win smart as opposed to how to win hard. And you always want to win, period. and winning smart is the smart way to win. In any case, that's going to pretty much take us to the end of the review. So my closing thoughts on the Flandre, objectively, on paper and in the game, she's a decent ship with a definite purpose and kind of a niche. I like her ability to relocate, but because of how quickly you tend to get thrown into the thick of things in Legends, I think she suffers a bit more here than maybe most battleships, since you'll usually want to execute a turn early in the game, and oftentimes, depending on the map, that means you're going to be doing it while being shot at. That's particularly harrowing in those games where you're playing against a legendary ship. If you get in the middle spawn, then you're often left to play very much against the strengths of this ship. And frankly, other than your wealth of hit points at that point, you're still in a position where almost any other battleship would be better. Not all that many folks love the gameplay equivalent of volunteering to be punched in the face for 15 minutes just because you're better suited to being punched in the face than your teammates. Plus, these turrets aren't actually that tough. They're not Jean Bart levels of paper mache, but they do get knocked out pretty often. As far as the campaign, as you may know, this ship is given to me, so I don't have a lot of hard decisions to make about whether or not I want it. Having some experience with it, though, I would say that she is among the more skippable battleships out there. She's good enough that I'll play her from time to time, but I definitely wouldn't lay awake at night if she wasn't in my port. For me, it often feels like this ship has one more problem than I can really fix, or it's just a ship that has a lot of advantages that can't be used oftentimes. So for me, it's a little bit more frustrating than average. In any case, those are my thoughts on the Flandre, the French version of a normal battleship. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. I hope you have enjoyed the video as always, and I'll see you on the next one.